Pastor. I am your host, the 5th day of the week host for this time slot, Sandi Craig. And I am so glad that you have joined me today. Well, if you want to know who I am, I am a pastor with my husband. We co-pastor Life of Worship here in Amarillo, Texas. Yeah, we're broadcasting here in this house from Amarillo, Texas. And we have services live on Shabbat. And you can tune in to our services on YouTube Live at about 5 o'clock in the afternoon on Shabbat. So yeah, you want to do that. Also, we have a few other things we do. We have a Tuesday evening, 8 p.m. Central broadcast called Walking in Spirit and Truth right here on this network, as well as Monday morning War Room prayers. And John hosts Let Us Reason Together on this time slot for the second day of the week time. Yeah, so there's a lot that we do and more. And there's a lot that the network does and more. You want to listen and catch up on that. And what is our main topic today? Well, we actually have two really good topics. In fact, so much that I need to talk less and get to the point. But we're going to talk about predestination. Is there really free will predestination? As well as, you need to stay tuned for this, the weaponization of our food supply. And we have a special guest host that's going to bring that forth. We want to hear all about it. So let's get down to business now so we can get to the good stuff, right? Yeah, right. Well, this is Thursday, November 7th, 2019, the 9th day of the 9th month of Sheshvan, Hebrew year 5780. And there are some things going on at Lamb Network. Yes, there are. As you notice, Stone Moss isn't here today, but he will be coming. So take heart. He's going to be here. We're going to schedule him in soon. But all of our shows are also broadcast right there on YouTube as well as Facebook. Yeah, live both places. Hallelujah for that, right? And you can also watch them live on the page. So be sure to check out the Meet the Show Host page and as well as the show information page because there's a lot there to know about. And you also need to understand that this is an interactive show. So if you can come into the chat room, we would love to hear what you have to say, hear your opinions, know what you know, and just let everybody else know too. And if you are watching from one of these sites, please like and subscribe. We want you to do that. Like it and subscribe. Share to your friends. Get up in front of your congregation and tell them all about it and share it with them. Let the whole world know. Isn't there a song like that? Let the whole world know. Anyway, there is, but you may not know it. So I do not do this show alone. And as I said, we want to get down to business quickly because there's some good stuff to discuss. Yeah, there are other people with me. And here with me today is Joe, the Hebrew, G.I. Joe, the lady ready for battle. And she is coming to us from Ohio, Toledo, Ohio. Hello, Joe.
Toledo, yeah. Hello.
It's good to see you. I was glad to. Sorry, I had to bug out quickly on the War Room this morning, but you saw what I had, my precious package that came to my door.
That's a treasure. That's not just a precious package. That's
Wasn't she? Treasure. Okay. If you don't know, my granddaughter, she doesn't normally come on Thursdays, but she came this morning and she saw herself on camera. She sang a song called With Amariah in the Family, Be Happy, Happy Home. And she kept singing it over and over before you guys tuned in. And then once you tuned in, she was just a chatterbox.
She was.
And what?
I said she was, and she is. She is a chatterbox.
And she has a new name for our leader, Mr. Mark David Smith, who is the founder of this network, who gets us going, who's the producer of this show. She calls him, what'd she call you? Shark? Shark. So your name's now Shark.
Da-dum, da-dum, da-dum.
She loved it that she joined right along. Now she will always know you as Shark. So you have a brand new name.
Yeah, when my daughter Sarah was here in June, she brought our two grandsons, which we rarely ever get to be with, together. Thank God for FaceTime and, Marco Polo. She uses Marco Polo more than anything else, but we get to see our two grandsons every day, literally every day. We get to watch them grow up and all the different things that they do. But when they were here physically in June for a month, I got overloaded with all the new children songs. But my daughter was raised up by this old man here with all the old children's songs I grew up with. So she remembers them and she incorporates them with the boys, and it's not all new stuff, and which I highly recommend. Learn the old stuff. The good stuff from Sunday school was even good. You just keep it going. And I would hate that we would lose those things in our society, the things from times past, which were just the most excellent stuff, and taught the children about God. And he has the whole world in his hands, and the kids know, her kids know these things, so how many of the kids these days know that song?
I don't. Mariah and I do. I may never. We walk around marching the infantry, riding
the cavalry.
Yeah. So we try to do them all. In fact, you probably don't even know. We'll sing "Only a Boy Named David," "Only a Little Sling." That's way back from when I was a little girl.
I don't remember that one.
Yeah, my mother was big on singing Bible songs all day. So when she was home, so
needs to.
Yeah, well, my mom messed them all up.
I can see that.
Y'all have met my mother now, so you understand. Yeah, it's not this little light of mine; it's this little light of mine. So yeah.
Well, hey, thank you for mamas, and thank you for bringing it forward. Well, amen. I wanted to let you guys know before we jump into Mark's topic, which is a topic we're all going to discuss. I did not answer the question of the day last week that said there's a study that finds men with these will end up making better life decisions. Before I give away the answer, does anybody want to tell me what it is?
Say it again, the question.
There's a study that finds men with these will end up making better life decisions.
Children.
Well, I think. I'm sorry.
I said children.
Children. Well, that's a good one. I think it's the same answer that you had for another one of your questions. I think it's a man cave. If you have a man cave, you get to go. The men go in there by themselves. They get to be with God. So be with God.
J.L. Craig needs to tell us what he thinks real quick. What do you think? There's a study that finds men with these will end up making better life decisions. Because I'm going to give away the answer in about 10 seconds.
He's not doing this while he's driving, is he?
Shh.
I will not be responsible. All right.
Okay. Well, guess what it is? It's daughters.
Wow.
Men with daughters will make better life decisions.
Well, let me just sit up a little more straight here. I have to totally agree with that.
Oh, well, anyway, sorry I didn't give that information before.
Especially guys, the men with two daughters, right? Because it balances them.
One's okay. One is fine.
Well, I would love to stay here for a little bit, and I would love to jump into our news attack, but we're going to skip all that today because why? We can arrange this program however we want to, because Mark has a topic that we're going to jump into and have a little fun with. It says, God knows everything before it happens, right? Question mark. Predestination? Question mark. So, Mark, tell us what you're thinking.
Man, if you don't, you got to have the music to get things going. Okay, I'm going to try to keep this as brief as possible, but there's a lot to this. And as most people know, and it is one of the reasons for creating the Lamb Network is because I see, and my perception of things are considerably different sometimes, a little different, and the same as others sometimes. I see things from a different perspective, I think, than a lot of others do. From way back on Lamb Radio and a lot of other shows we've done, I've kind of brought this subject up along with other ones that are a little controversial and people think, because I am very, very interested in other people's opinion on these things, and predestination, or the question of does God know everything that's going to happen in the world, the spinning world, and in our individual lives, 7 billion plus people? Does he already know those things that are going to happen from now until the time we go to be with the Lord? Does he plan everything that's going to happen in the spinning world and in our lives? Or does he have an idea from the beginning that if you choose these things in your life, this is what's going to happen to you individually? If the things that happen in politics and world leaders and people that are in authority of different countries, different regions, different cities around the world, if they make these decisions, then these things are going to happen. And not necessarily that he has pre-planned them. Now, that latter one is more along the lines of what I believe, and I think it's based on very, very, very early on in my early 20s, my pastor that I spent time with doing tent revivals and hellfire and damnation preaching. We discussed this at length a lot, and it stuck with me very heavily. So through the years and in my transition into the Messianic lifestyle, I've brought that with me, but yet at the same time, allowed circumstances and what other teachers bring forth in that area, which, by the way, this is a subject that is rarely ever talked about. I kind of looked, and there's a few out there, but in the Messianic lifestyle, this subject is rarely talked about. I'm real interested. But again, too, if you know me and how I teach and how I understand things, I also have this, what do I want to call it? I don't like it when people just use words or phrases because they've heard somebody else use it, and that's the way they understand that word or that phrase, and they just use it randomly. And so for me to understand something like predestination or God's will or at will, those type of things, I always need to know the definition of these words. So I've kind of put together a few words so that we can understand a little bit more. And I'm going to start with the word destiny. Destiny, in my opinion, is a word that is highly misused. And people even name their girls Destiny, of course, with the LGBTQRST. I think even boys will probably be named Destiny. Anyway, makes a cute little girl's name. But do people really look up the definition of these things before they go naming their kids the names they name them? So, destiny, the events that will necessarily happen to a particular person or thing in the future. the hidden power believed to control what will happen in the future. And then they put the word fate. I think that's interesting. So, and by the way, these words, all these words that I'm giving you are, they're from Latin. And so that makes them Greek words. Don't get me started on Greek words. That's a whole nother show and a whole nother subject and talk. So let's flip over to fate. The word fate means the development of events beyond a person's control. Beyond a person's control, regarded as determined by a supernatural power. The course of someone's life or the outcome of a particular situation for someone or something seen as beyond their control. The inescapable death of a person. Now, this is the one you really want to get, because fate is the base word that is behind destiny. And this is where these come from. Being a Greek-based word, this next definition will explain these in detail, and also the next words that are coming based off of the word destiny. Destiny and fate. Fate is our base word, our foundation word that creates all these others. So I want you to listen to this, because this is really important. This is the origin of all these words. It's three goddesses who presided over the birth and the life of humans. Each person's destiny was thought of as a thread spun, measured, and cut by three fates. These are harder than the other ones. Lachesis and Tropos. Those were the three goddesses. So that in itself ought to give you an idea what we're looking at when we're talking about fate, destiny, predestination. And let's go to predestination next. The definition of predestined or predestine is of an outcome or course of events determined in advance by divine will or fate. Divine will. That means of a supernatural god or goddess, that it's their will. And we'll get into that more here in a minute. Of God, capital G-O-D, destined someone for a particular fate or purpose, determine an outcome of course of events in advance by divine will or fate. Once again, the same thing. So here's another word that I wanted to check out. Preordained. In other words, it's kind of the same thing as it's an outcome or course of action decided or determined beforehand. Predestined, decided or determined beforehand. So there you go. Preordained. That's another word that is kind of commonly used. Here's another word that we're going to hear a little bit more about, and that is the word providence. Remember, all of these words come from that original word fate, which in the Greek has made these other words. The word providence, the protective care of God or of nature, of God or nature, as a spiritual power. So, and the word God they have in here is capital G-O-D, the protective care of capital G-O-D or of nature as a spiritual power. So providence, if you use that word providence, you have to let everybody know, is this of capital G-O-D or is it of Mother Nature? God or nature as providing protective or spiritual care, timely preparation for future eventualities. Here's another word that is used somewhat, but is wrongly used. It's paradox. It comes from the same base, fate, destiny, predestined, all those. Paradox, a seemingly absurd or self-contradictory statement or proposition that when investigated or explained may prove to be well-founded or true. A statement of proposition, logically unacceptable or self-contradictory. A situation, person, or thing that combines contradictory features or qualities. And that's what I was talking before, capital G-O-D, or nature. So it's real common in man to use in our lives, in our lifestyle, in the Christian and Jewish lifestyle, and the world as a whole. It's real common to use words that are actually contradiction of themselves, but yet sound so much like what you're saying, it doesn't really work. So predestination, this is the definition of this based on Wikipedia. Predestination in theology is the doctrine that all events have been willed by God, usually with reference to the eventual fate of the individual soul. Explanations of predestination often seek to address the paradox of free will. So the contradiction or contradictory statements of free will. So when you say God's will to do this, you can actually have a contradictory statement in there, whereby God's omniscience seems incompatible with human free will in this usage. Predestination can be regarded as a form of religious determinism and usually predeterminism. Predetermined, so determined and predetermined. Let me give you just a little quick history. There is some disagreement among scholars regarding the views of predestination in first century Judaism. So Christianity had their idea of predestination, but Judaism was way off. In other words, they absolutely believed in God, but it is God's will, and this is more my understanding, is that it is God's will that these things happen, and that's what his Torah is all about, and the prophets, the writings, the Brit Hadashah. It is basically his will that these things happen in the world, the spinning world, and in everybody's life in this world, especially us that hold that lifestyle dear. So if that is his will, and I'm not going to call it free will, it's just his will, then it should be our will too. But it doesn't necessarily mean that he has pre-planned everything that's going to happen, or in my opinion, I believe that it doesn't mean that he also knows that these things are going to happen. I believe because of will, because of our free will and God's will, God has given it to us to have that free will, and we can make a decision of which direction we're going to go. When we go a specific direction, or when world leaders go a specific direction, it causes these things to happen. He wills it, but it doesn't mean that is the way it's going to go. He knows the end from the beginning because he knows the heart and the will of man. And overall, this is the destination that it will finish up. Doesn't mean that it's destiny, predestination, or predetermined that way. That's my opinion. So here we go. let's bring everybody in and get everybody else's opinion on this. Let's start. Sandy, what do you think? I mean, based on the whole thing that I put together, I'm very interested. There's no wrong or right answers.
Well, I personally believe, and this is only my opinion, that I believe that time is something that we are restricted by. It says that we are seated in heavenly places right now with him. And with that being, I believe he does know the end from the beginning, as you said, but you said it in a different aspect. I believe that he has given us, he has things set in order, but he also is not restricted by yesterday or tomorrow, that he's already been at the end. He's already seen the end. So thus he knows our choices. There was an interesting thing I came across on this, and it says, let me find it and I can tell you what it says. The sun can melt butter, but it can also harden the ground. The sun can make the flowers grow, or the sun can cause death to those very same. It's the same sun shining, but on the world or on the individual, but it is determined. It is all determined by the vessel. Yah knows if the heart will be receptive to change. It's the heart that makes the difference. But in that, I believe that. So I believe a little differently than you, and that's okay. That he's already seen the end. He knows the end result. Yeah, we see how his heart was changed because he's already been there. He's already seen that by Abraham and others. Moses, God moved. They moved on Yah's heart, but he's already seen the end. He's already seen the beginning. We know that he says that he wants. Hello, here's Mr. John Craig.
Hi.
We know that the word says that he in Ezekiel 18 that he wants us to have life. He wants us to choose life. We see, but we also see, like in Matthew 22:14, for many are called, but few are chosen. And so you see these verses that seem contradictory, but in fact they're not. When we find a contradiction in the word, it's not the word that's contradictory. It's our understanding of the word. Now, as you brought up the sages say it's a mystery. In Judaism, they say it's a mystery. Predestination, free will, it's a mystery. And the fact that we try to reason it out with our human reasoning is not going to work. We're not going to be able to grasp the infinite wisdom of God, period. And I believe in that, in part, that's true as well. How we can't figure that out, but yet we also know that we also see where Joseph said it was God's will that he follow that journey, because he had the journey planned out from the beginning, even though the brothers chose to sin and do what they did. So we find this concept of free will versus, or as you said, will. I'm saying free will versus predestination throughout the word. But the contradiction is just in our understanding, because our minds are so finite. Our minds, we try to understand something that's a concept beyond our understanding, because again, I believe we are so linearly built that we see time as this thing that hasn't happened. And I believe God's been there already. He's already seen that. He's seen the choices. Yes, because we do have the choices. He chooses to give us the opportunity to make choices for him. And it's our heart that determines the outcome. But, he says that he desires all of us to be saved. You saw, your eyes saw my unformed substance, in your book were written, every one of them, the days that were for me, when as yet there was none of them. So there we see that concept that he knows the end from the beginning, and that he's already seen our life play out in a whole. But it's us who are so limited in our understanding, because we are constricted by the idea of time. And I could go on and on, but there's not going to be time for everybody else to talk.
Right.
So
let me respond real quick. Okay. two things. First of all, extremely good scripture that you brought up when he says that I laid before you life and death, choose life, right? Still yet, and like you said, see, I think it's like I said before, with God, it's his will. There's no free will. He already has that will. We, on the other hand, he has given us free will. In other words, he doesn't set our path. He gives us that ability to choose death or life, and we can. And he knows that whichever way we choose, this will happen if you choose life, and this will happen if you choose death. See, and so that's why I say with God, it's not a free will, because it's already predetermined with him. That's his will for this to happen. But with man, we do have free will to make one path of our lives go or another path of our lives go. So I think that was really good what you said, and a perfect verse to look at when God, which is rarely in scripture, where God gives you two paths and says, now you choose that path. Okay. But I'm asking you to choose life. So it's interesting that explained it all. Very good. And I had forgot about that. That brought that up. Joe, go ahead.
I'm going to make it very simple. First of all, God created children to show us things. And as a parent, we're preparing to go to, let's just say we're going to go to the doctor's office. We know we're going to get to that doctor's office. We have that destination, and we're getting our kids ready. That child is going to choose if he's going to put his pants on and get ready on time, or if he's not. And yeah, we sometimes have to give them a little spanking and stuff, and there are times in life where things gear us towards a different direction. And the child has, we got to feed the child, get the child ready. And we are doing all this while the child still has his own will, his own choices, and he doesn't want to do it. You practically have to drag him through some of the things. But at the end result, you end up at the doctor's office. Well, we look at scripture, and the Father has put throughout the scripture the things that are going to happen. But we have to decide if we're going to go kicking and screaming to do it, or are we going to be obedient and follow through with what he wants us to do. It's like you said, it's our choice. And it's the same with children. This is, I believe, why he calls us children, because we are just like our children. And he blesses us with children to show us the actions that, yes, the child has the free will, but yet there's still discipline that happens in that child's life. There's still consequences that happen as well with the choices that we make. And it kind of brings us sometimes back, because you look at, I'm trying to think, like Abraham, his life and the consequences of his life, different things that he chose, like Ishmael was born because he chose to go and do it his way instead of God's way. But God the Father let it happen anyway, because Abraham chose to do this aspect. So he ended up with Ishmael, and there were problems that happened. So we have to reap the rewards of our choices still. So this is just a simple, I'm very simple when it comes to things. I like things being simple. God created things to be simple anyway, and we complicate it. But I agree with Sandy, and I just thought I'd bring it in a simple manner.
Well, very few people agree with me, so it's perfectly fine. I've dealt with that. But what I'm hearing from what you say, it's not the beginning or the end. It's the in between. It's what we decide to do in between, because God has already knows what's going to happen at the end.
Yeah, because he determined the beginning and he's determined the end.
I see what you're saying. I disagree with the end result, but that's fine. That's me. John, I don't know how much you've heard of what I introduced, but do you want to give a quick
Yeah, it's a very interesting subject, and boy, you can look at it so many different angles on this, and we can probably all say, hey, we're all right, but because of the angle we're looking at, here's something. When you look at what's happening in the world today, with the effect of quantum computing. With quantum computing, they can actually have multiple scenarios, multiple personalities, multiple events going on, and then boil it down to one individual and predetermine the outcome based on computing processes of what that person is going to do and how they're going to react, what they're going to live out in the course of that scenario. And that is based on quantum computing. It's almost like it's the AI technology is able to go in and say, I know what your life is going to do today, this week, this month, this year, based on the circumstances and the way everything is playing out in cultural, political, geophysical world events that are going on. We can determine what you're going to do. And quantum computing can boil that down and get it calculated within a second.
So it's predetermined.
It's predetermined now
by a computer.
By a computer. Now, let's give it back it off for just one thing. Can it change? Yes, because we've been given a free will, and that free will can say, "I'm going to change it up today and completely blow the algorithm." And I really think that that kind of plays in with this whole concept of predestination in terms of a hard sense, is that we've been given that whole element of choice is that one factor which may end up being the very one factor of our eternal destiny. Yet the Father knows the outcome. So there we go. That's a 2 cents on that.
No, that's good. And see, that almost is where I'm at with it, except that I think only the very end of all of time and all of what God has in plan is what God knows. In between there, he kind of has an idea because man and world leaders make certain decisions. I agree. Very similarly, and I'm almost done here, very similarly, I've asked John, Sandy, and Joe to watch a documentary that I just saw on Netflix. I think everybody should watch this. And it's about Cambridge Analytica, and what Facebook did is that Cambridge Analytica bought all personal data from Facebook and then used it to predetermine what people are going to do in an election or anything. And Facebook has even used it, that's against the law and they can't do it anymore, to give the ads. So when you come on Facebook or a web page and all of a sudden an ad pops up, say for instance, I'm looking for a car. I've been looking for a new car. And so now I'm not looking for a car. I'm doing something totally different, but I'm on a web page. All of a sudden an ad shows up for a car. See? And that is that technology. So it's kind of the same thing as what John's talking about there, when computers can predetermine or look at what you've done in the past and what you're wanting to do in the future. It's different with God to me because we have that free will and we can change it up. So that's my whole deal. And thank you, Sandy, for letting me share all that.
Well, I think we'll have to revisit this sometime. It's a good topic. But time has gotten away from us. Thank you, Mark, for presenting it. It's something to think about and ponder. And guess what? You really heard pretty much the same view, but it little tweaks here and there. You put it on a shelf and you go study it out and you pray and you let that happen. But we're going to go to our news story because we have a guest here, Mr. John Craig, the pastor, co-pastors with me at Life of Worship. And I think this is the first time you've been on this show, The Next Chapter. I think it is the first time. It is. I appreciate the invitation. But there's no time for frivolities. We can't talk about that. No, because it's time to we've got a big news story today. Actually, it's a story that we wanted to present on Walking in Spirit and Truth, and we couldn't get it done. We tried, and there were so many technical issues, and it needs some time. So you guys, I will post a link in there for you to watch a video at your own time. But we're talking about the weaponization of our food supply. And you may say, what? Well, what a perfect way the government can use to control you, but to control the food supply that you have. Synthetic food is now popular, or becoming popular. In fact, synthetic food may be filling our shelves soon, and that's all that's there. Synthetic food made up of chemicals, et cetera, et cetera. We have losses because of natural disasters, as well as man-made issues with the chemtrails and things, spraying things in our crops, basically make them not grow. If you had a hard growing season this year, there's a reason for that. Production down 20%. Guess what? Prices are going way up, whether you've noticed it or not. And we're going to talk a little bit about the weaponization of our food supply, a lot of it actually, and some more specific information. So we're going to let Mr. John Craig take it away.
All right. So I'm just going to get some stuff going here to get our brain juices flowing, so to speak. But I want to give you a couple quotes. Here's a quote from George Orwell. "We may find in the long run that tinned food or canned food is a deadlier weapon than the machine gun." And then another quote, Michelle Jerkovich said this: "If starvation is cheap and requires low levels of technology, why not always use it?" And here's something else. Well, so what's the point here is that food and its production, I'm going to read a couple different things. Food and its production has been a principal concern since the beginning of time. Governments monitor the food supply very carefully for the sake of national security. The fluctuation in the price of core goods can make life very hard for everyone. So give us our daily bread, because a hungry citizenry can bring a nation to ruin. Well, what have we been seeing, and what's been going on that's been in the United Nations documents? It's been in the scientific journals. It's been it wasn't published widely until the day after 9/11 of all different things. And here we are in the year 2019, where it's been talked about, discussed for a year. FEMA has planned for it. Homeland Security has planned for it. All these huge government agencies have been set up and figuring out what are they going to do when there's a serious crisis in the food. But it's beyond just coming up with a serious crisis in the food production, but it is a point in which the government is able to control food production to make it, or seizing food production to make it a crisis. Now let's take some things into account. There have been events over the last several years where there was a county in South Carolina where they did and I'm going to call it this because this was a Mike Adams Natural News report, where they nuked a county with chemicals, which literally killed the entire production of pollinating insects. And for example, 2 million bees were killed in one aerial spray over. Because what was it for? It was for, and this is what they said, for the general public's good. Why were they doing this? Because they said that they needed to test a particular chemical to see if they could wipe out the nefarious Zika mosquito, or Zika virus carrying mosquitoes. And what did they find out? Yeah, they were able to wipe out every organism that pollinates in that county. And that weaponization of using chemical spray overs, from pesticides to the geoengineering, which, by the way, the geoengineering that we see in the skies today, some have called it chemtrailing. It's when you look up into the sky and you see long plumes of cloudy, filmy-like sprays coming out from aircraft. You may even
think it's clouds because it's dispersed.
Yeah, and they're all straight line grid lines that they eventually cover the sky and cause a almost a dimming of the sky, a haze. And these are not contrails, because contrails dissipate rather quickly. But in those is more than just aluminum and barium, which are, of course, bad for the soil and bad for crops and bad for health. But they're also have found out when they do a chemical test and analysis that there's other ingredients within those
Body
sprays,
parts.
which includes human cells, nanoparticles of blood, and a number of other different things that actually fall onto the earth, onto the plants, and are absorbed into the plants.
Enough so that it makes plants actually bleed.
Yes, there have been plants
Look like blood is coming from plants now.
Yeah, there's certain plants that their plants are filled with chlorophyll. So if they're going to leak anything, it's going to be maybe a clear or a greenish liquid that's going to come out of them. But they've actually had blood, and you test it, and it has nanoparticles of blood within it, and it's red. It's red.
Human blood.
There's things that's in those chemical spray overs, and that is causing an oxidation within the plants. And for example, one lady, and her name is Celeste Bishop Solomon, and she was part of FEMA. And she was involved in these high-level government organizations. And when she found out what the whole plan was, she packed up her suitcases and left town.
In fact, what she did, she heard them laughing about killing the population, which is why this is happening. It's the global agenda to knock off the population, to control and seize the food supply, so that the only food that you get comes from the government, synthetic food, which will either kill you at the moment or kill you later down the line. But it is all part of the plan. And she heard them talking, and there was this evil demonic laugh that came forth from these people. And she packed up her bags and left. A person that was in this organization said, I can't be here, because there was an evil to it about the whole goal of killing the population and how fun it is. And she's heard it twice, but she packed up and left and got out of the government that moment.
Yeah.
Literally.
So the best way to wipe out populations, and the most cost efficient way, is the answer to this question: why waste bullets when you can bring a nation to its knees by starvation and disease? Now, when we look at what happened with the crops this year, the crop production this year in the United States is only 20% of what it was last year. And we can say a lot of weather related different things. And the question is, the weaponization of our food supply is not only related to the geoengineering aspect of it, but also the weaponization of the weather, as it's
to control the food.
To control the food process. Too much rain, not enough rain. They can control They can control how much rain comes in and is dumped on an area. We've had massive floodings, and we've had massive droughts, and that's not just in the United States, but it is worldwide. And so much to the point that China is like, what are we going to do to feed our population? And they've been coming to the United States. And President Trump just passed some type of trade bill with China by which we would sell a portion of our food to them. But what's happened this fall during the time of harvest? They have, and of course, there's harvest throughout the summer. So they've not been able to get into a lot of the fields because there was such an early snow in much of the bread belt that they cannot get into the fields to harvest the soybean and the corn. And because the snow came and it's too wet, and then the concern of fungus and molds and stuff getting on the crops, not only the production was less, but what they're able to harvest out will be less as well. These are the things that the government's been paying attention to. Well, how's that going to translate? And we're going to kind of boil this down. How does this translate into what we see at our shelves? Because most people, it's strange enough that our education system doesn't tell people how food gets to market, by which we go to the grocery store and buy it. But most people, what we're going to be seeing in the near future is going into grocery stores. Even
as soon as Thanksgiving, guys.
That going to the shelves and saying, how come we don't have much food on the shelves? It's because the production's not there. The canned food that we're seeing and the processed food that we're seeing on the shelves today is from last year's harvest, because they're still getting this year's harvest out of the fields and going into production.
The very little that there is.
So go ahead.
I wanted to just help you guys understand too. There is legislation that controls every part of food production. It controls everything from the transfer of food to the growing of food. Anyone who carries food, regulates grocery stores, anything like that. And you may think it doesn't impact the backyard farmers anymore. Well, that's not true. As of on October 31st, 2005, under the National Animal Identification System, there was a 3-prong approach. And ultimately, it said, if you had the potential, and I use the word potential, to earn $1,000 by growing food or selling food, potential. This includes if you're in an apartment, guys. Yeah, an apartment too. Then potential, not that you do, not that you're even in the business, but potentially you could do it. You are considered a farm. In other words, we've heard that the government uses us as a corporation and puts our name and has all these things. Well, this goes along with it. If you're a farm, you have to register. Well, if you have the potential now, you're assigned a unique identifier, which has the United States code first. And that means your assets and your property and your name second. So if the U.S. defaults, the U.S. is the first person on the title, you're the second. You pay the bills. And in the case if the U.S. goes bankrupt, they can seize your property because you could potentially sell it. Now, here's the next thing. If you have a garden, it's now legal to have a garden because it was illegal. But here's the deal. Your garden can only feed you. If you feed you, it does not allow you to feed your family. If I grow something in my garden, I can't feed him. Because once I do, then that becomes that's an illegal, that's like a farming activity. You are only allowed to grow food for yourself. Personally, you, not your family, you. So you may grow food on your own food on your property and consume it without the government regulations. And if you eat it yourself, you don't have them. But if you serve it to any member of your family, now you are subject to all government regulations. Now, who of us is going to grow a garden and not serve the people in our home? Well, because we serve the people in our home, we are now subject to government regulations because they want to control all the food and they want to get rid of the food, just like they push vaccines, because the vaccines are ultimately, there are things in there that are going to kill you. 9% effective this year is what the government says their vaccine is, but yet they're pushing
for flu,
for the flu vaccine. Only 9%. It's the
effective.
same with the food. That's why they're moving to synthesize food, fake food like fake news, because that way they can add what they need to add and control you as a person. Are you going to be subject? Are you going to do that? It's been suggested by Celeste that you start growing food in your home during the winter. I don't know how that's going to work out, but I'm thinking I'm going to figure it out. Now, here's the next thing. You may say, well, I'll just go out into the wilderness and get my own food. Well, that's not going to work either, guys, because the government planted this thing in the wilderness areas called chronic wasting disease. And it is a real thing. And it eats the brain, so there's no brain left. And you will never know if it's been contaminated, but they put it out in the wilderness areas to attack plants and animals, deer, elk, moose, all of that stuff that we might use as a food supply. So that if you took hold of that meat or that plant, that you would contract that disease and you would also die. It's man-made bioweapon and similar to the Andromeda strain. And we got to take it serious. And they've done it so those people who live off the land can no longer live off the land. You have to come into the cities. You have to be government dependent. It is all a plan of our government to control us, the weaponization of our food supply. So we can't even go out and kill our animals. Now, if you look at the map is centralized in some areas of where the chronic wasting disease exists. But Celeste Sumar, who was in this government thing, says, don't be fooled. It's everywhere. You know, don't depend on a test. Don't depend on anything. This chronic wasting disease is out there in the wilderness areas on plants and wildlife so that we can no longer search out plants or wildlife for ourselves without being subject to this disease and dying from it.
Right. And so one of the whole purposes of this is for population control in terms of how many people are living. And of course, the stated goal of the globalists is to reduce the world's population to 500 million, according to the Georgia Guidestones. And the Pentagon's National Defense University said this on the eve of the 2003 Iraq War. They issued a paper declaring agribiz is to the United States what oil is to the Middle East. Agribusiness has become a strategic weapon in the arsenal of the world's only superpower. And William Engdahl has astutely pieced together the weaponization of seeds and control over global food production as the central strategic weapon of the world's only superpower. These silent weapons are used by U.S. aid and the powerful American tax-free foundations. Well, what does that mean? Well, for example, there's a company called Monsanto who's changed their name to Bayer. Bayer's related to the same chemical company that sold the chemical weapons to the Nazis that were used in the gas chambers of Nazi Germany. Monsanto has gotten such a bad name, especially with Roundup and the glyphosate issues and cancer-causing things. So they're going by the name of Bayer now. There's a big Bayer plant in Lubbock, Texas, that was just built this last year, over the last couple of years. And
the Monsanto plant.
It
does say Monsanto.
It says Bayer on it now. I passed the other day.
Oh, well,
as a new sign.
When I went and took Mom to the hospital, it still said Monsanto.
Oh, it's up on the big side of the building.
Okay.
So they're using both names. They're the ones that also came up with the Agent Orange, the defoliant back in the Vietnam War. But what glyphosate does is it kills the beneficial soil organisms vital for the uptake of critical minerals into the plant. So leaving a less healthy, less nutritious food supply as well. That they've also chemically or genetically modified most of the seed in America. And now they and their other agribusinesses control 95% of the U.S. Production. It may be world production of seed. Let me see, nearly 95% of genetic engineering research is paid for and controlled by Monsanto and other multinational seed corporations who manipulate scientific research to hide the dangers of genetically altered plants and animals. So what are we looking at? We are looking at, I've mentioned several different things, what's happening even this year, things that we've been planning for in the Hebrew roots community, Messianic communities, things knowing that in preppers, we've been looking at a time where the food would become a shortage.
It's here. Guys.
It's here.
It's here.
We're talking about things that are man-made, but we're also looking at things that are actual geophysical things that are happening within the earth itself as the world goes through a change, and it's not man-made. It is things that are being affected by the sun, the grand solar minimum, with things as well as radiation coming not only from the sun, but also the radiation coming from the other side of the earth, as well as the effect of these coronal mass ejections that are hitting the earth, that are really hurting the electromagnetic field around the earth. These type of things are all affecting the planet. They're causing planetary changes, and it's creating like the perfect storm where our food supplies are at risk more than any other time in our history.
I want to talk about the grand solar minimum here in just a moment, but I want you to understand that this October 1st, the Food Safety Dashboard rolled out, and it is under the Food Safety Modernization Act of SMA to assure in a new era of smart food. Smart food is a code for synthetic food, not from nature, not from God. It's synthetic. And so that's the food you're going to be looking at, the only food that will be available. But here is something else, this grand solar minimum. What we've been experiencing, it's been happening more and more lately, and it will last for days. But not only can it play havoc on crops and atmospheric conditions, but these grand solar minimums that are happening also affect you. It brings forth violence in a person. I don't know if you've ever watched Kingsman, but the Kingsman movie, they had some weapon and they turned it on and people became violent. Well, this is a natural thing where people
through the cell phones,
that this is a natural thing that's occurring. And people that would normally not do things do certain things because of this. People are up in arms. And it happens in these rolling events that get closer and closer together. People's love for each other waxes cold. Now you set that up with people that have been brought in from China, from Russia, that have been placed throughout the United States, as well as other troops, and people who normally might not do something but could all of a sudden these grand solar minimums are happening. You wonder how they could go and take a population out. Well, this could easily explain how that would happen, or that how we would take one another out, because of the violence that's happening, in part because of these grand solar minimums, not to mention the other things that the governments are playing with to control people, and the way they act, even through our 5G, through other things, correct?
Yeah. So the grand solar minimum is a cycle of the sun that we are entering into, like what was here in the United States 200 years ago. For example, you see the paintings of George Washington crossing the Delaware, and there's chunks of ice in the river. Well, we have not seen that in our generation. We haven't seen the Delaware, many rivers in the United States frozen over. Maybe there was some back in the 70s. There was a solar minimum during the 70s when they were talking about global cooling. But now we're actually seeing an early onset of winter in the United States, as well as our spring was a lot longer. So we're seeing that, and these are the effects of the sun going on. It has nothing to do with any man-made.
But it plays in with the man-made stuff too. Now here, we're going to let you guys comment here, but I want you guys to understand that things that you need to do right now is you need to have some food and water, and you need to possibly prepare for a hard winter, especially if you're in the north. I'll let you finish what you're saying, and then we're going to let Mark and Joe jump in.
Right. So the things to be aware of is that now there are remedies. There's remedies to these things. And you can go back and you can research and you can look up weaponization of our food supply. And there's a great report from the Hagman report where they actually went into details on these things. There are remedies in regards to what type of foods we can grow in our homes during the wintertime.
I got to figure that out.
Sprouts are great. There's all sorts of different type of sprouts that provide natural nutrients that we really need in our bodies. There are different herbal supplements. There are different vitamins and minerals that we can supplement ourselves with. There are also things that are natural remedies that can actually fight some of these chemicals that they've put into our foods that affect our bodies, so that we can have bolster our immune system against them and purge our bodies and cleanse our bodies from these. So those are things that we need to research as well.
And do not fear, because we are Yah's, but we also need to be wise in what we do. And we need to prepare, just as Noah, just as Joseph. So we're going to let you guys jump in. There's a lot more we could say, but there's no time to say it. So we would love to say more on it, because we didn't even cover even close to what we had. But you guys, why don't you come on in and let us know what you think? Joe.
I wanted to add that book that she spoke about. It's called Electromagnetic Radiation Provision for the Coming Nuclear and Solar Crisis. And this is by Celeste Bishop Solomon. And this is foods that'll help you get through these things. You know what I find interesting as well is my daughter works in a pharmacy. She's pharmaceutical tech, and she's noticed something really interesting. More and more people are coming to the pharmacy to get medication, and more people are becoming violent. In fact, she had an issue last Saturday where a man threatened her life because of not getting the meds. And with the food and the medication, because remember, she was talking about how there's medication and chemicals in the food. It's causing chaos in the brain.
Right.
And it was just amazing. I just was like, I wasn't surprised, but to hear that really threw me for a loop. And then, what I've noticed is we talked about it earlier in the show. It's circular. Everything is repeating itself. Children, like you said earlier, John, are not being taught history. They're not being taught during the 1935, 34, I think is when Hitler started to come into power, and he started taking control, and he took control of the food and everything, and everybody had to have papers. And your papers had to say what nationality you are or what bloodline you were, like if you were a Jew or if you were a Greek or a Catholic or a Christian or a Baptist or a Methodist, whatever you were, it was on your paperwork. And that is starting to come forth as well. And I was talking to Sandi earlier today. We were talking before the War Room Prayers. Our local Walmart here in Ohio, Toledo, Ohio, Holland. Well, it's in Holland, Ohio. It's just right outside of Toledo. We've walked in there, and my husband and I looked at each other and said, we've noticed that the produce section has shrunk, immensely shrunk, that there's a lot of things you can't find anymore. The other thing that I've noticed, I used to do retail years ago, selling things, is the shelves still look like they're stocked, but if you really look closely, there's a big gap from the front of the shelf to the back of the shelf.
I saw that yesterday. I was at the grocery store, and at first glance, it looks like it's full, but there's nothing behind those first couple rows of cans.
Yeah. And the other thing was, we went through another canned good area, and I said, why are the shelves empty? So I asked this one guy, and he goes, oh, well, we're restocking, was his excuse. And Dave and I looked at each other and said, no, I don't think they're restocking, but they're not putting as much as they did before. And if you notice, the cans are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. People don't realize that. They're too busy picking up that can, throwing it in their grocery cart, and keep going. And, I found it interesting that the egg price, I don't know if you guys noticed it in Texas, but here the egg prices have really dropped. But when you take that egg from the store, mind you, I decided to buy, instead of my regular eggs, I decided to buy the eggs from the store just to check them out. When you pick them up, they almost break instantly. I mean, the shelf is getting so weak. And so they're doing something to that. And we talked about bees. They not only did are they killing the bees, but they've also been infecting the bees with a type of bee disease, because we have a honey guy here. I get my fresh honey from him, and he says his queen bees are dying off quicker and quicker, to where his prices of honey has to go up higher and higher, because there is a disease that's being passed on. Somehow the bees are bringing it into the hive, and the hive is starting to die off from this disease, and the queen is getting it, and she's laying these eggs where the babies are becoming deformed. So we have this, and you need the bee. The bee is the pollinator of the plant, to where, like an apple tree, the blossom opens. The bee goes from one blossom to another so that it can produce an apple. If you don't have that, you're not going to get an apple.
Right.
The apple is not going to exist.
That was the whole thing about that South Carolina experiment, was it affected the pollination of those of the bees.
If you kill the bee, then you kill the people.
You kill the food cannot produce.
Now, I want to tell you what's in their plan. In their plan right now this is what they plan for you to eat. Get something like a protein bar. You may have that. One person may have part of a protein bar every 3 weeks.
Yeah,
that is what they are. What, huh?
It was 1/3 of a bar every 3 weeks.
That's all you get. That
protein.
is per person. That is the amount of food the government expects to give you to eat. 1/3 of a protein bar every 3 weeks per person, period. That is their plan. And they laugh evilly about it, because that is what they're doing. Mark, I want to bring you in. Oh, Joe, go ahead.
I was going to say one other thing, because, you guys know my mom's from California, and I found this interesting. My sister had told her this, because she's a realtor. They are now selling more and more condos. They call them condos. They're apartments. And my sister went into these apartment condos, and they're all computer security cameras. You've got these refrigerators that talk to you. They sound wonderful. Okay. And my sister said, I felt like I was in a sci-fi movie when I was showing this condo to someone, because they say they have a locking mechanism. Now think about it. They have a locking mechanism where it's all computerized. You stick your thumb on there, or your eye, or whatever it could be, or punch in a code. Well, you're in your apartment. All of a sudden, the government decides there is a lockdown. You are locked into that apartment. You cannot get out of that apartment. All the windows are locked. Everything is locked, but it's for your safety.
And it's all controlled by AI, which is a whole nother area we didn't even get to discuss yet. AI is going to be in control. Mark.
You guys are all a bunch of conspiracy theorists. I don't believe a word of anything you guys said at all. Everything's fine here. We're good, you know. You know, I don't know what's going on. I don't see it. Seriously, I was in Walmart yesterday. The produce is overstocked. All the canned goods. This Walmart here, they stock 24/7. There has never been one time I have not been in that store in the aisles, in multiple aisles, that they are constantly stocked. And I'm saying the full thing is there. Now, that's what I see. I mean, I can only speak of what I see. I don't study this stuff out like you guys do, so I don't really have anything to add except that so much. One thing Joe said that I do agree with, that I've been noticing for quite some time, is the eggs seem to break immediately, and I don't like my yolk broke. I want that in over easy, and it's easy when the shells are so thin that you break that, and it's real easy for the yolk to break too. So I've had to learn not to. Now, we'd love to buy them at somebody's house down the road, but the one we were getting them from don't do it anymore. So anyway, seriously, I don't personally, I haven't seen it, so I can't speak to it. I believe everything that you guys are saying. My fingers are crossed. I'm just joking, but I mean, I trust and respect everything you're saying. But once again, here's my question. Could this be at least starting from regional areas? If both of you guys are seeing it, but I don't see it at all anywhere. And we get our groceries from 3 different sources. In other words, I buy the basic stuff that is no big deal from Walmart. Adina goes to Food Lion and Publix because she likes the quality of other things and different products we can't get at Walmart. She buys from there, but it's the same thing. All 3 stores in our area, 3 grocery stores, are overstocked all the time.
I definitely think you're going to see geographic moves, but you're going to see a lot of this experimented with in California. In fact, they say they're experimenting with California, and you're going to see it. The larger the city, you're going to see more effect from it. Okay. And what I want to remind everybody, a lot of this information isn't coming from somebody who's outside just sitting at a computer. The information is coming from someone who worked in FEMA, who heard the plans, who knows the plans, who seriously studies and knows what's coming. And she herself said, time's pretty much up. It's not that it's going to start. It's already, there's not an event that's going to start things. It's already started. I can tell you right now here in Amarillo, I was telling Joe this earlier, canned salmon and some things like that, that's been unavailable now for 5 to 6 months here in Amarillo, Texas. It's been off the shelves. You look at the shelves and there's a big blank spot. And I keep thinking they'll resupply, they'll redo. Nothing's ever, at least the last time I went to the store, which was a few weeks back, but it was not there. And that's been months. So I'm going to let you talk some more, John, here, but I want us to remember, it's not just us sitting out here. This show is simply, you don't have to believe it. It's okay. But we want a warning out there, just because we do need to be prepared. What if she's right and by Thanksgiving there's nothing on the shelves? What if it becomes like Poland and other countries back in the day when all you could buy was, you walk into the store thinking you're going to stock up and there's 2 things available, some pate and something else? You know, are we prepared for those times to come? Are we prepared? You need to ask yourself.
I understand what you're saying for Thanksgiving, but isn't it great that Christmas presents aren't food? Because there's an overabundance of those. And so I think they're taking everything off the shelf as food to make room for more Christmas gifts to be sold.
Think about that, Mark. Yeah.
Hey, you know, you got to have different perspectives on these
We
things.
can eat the cardboard, right?
So I want everybody to consider this. This is according to the FEMA statistics, is that only 3% of the people that are listening to this broadcast or that are studying this out will actually do something about their own food supplies. 7% of the people listening that learn about this stuff will do one or two things. And 90%, and this is the government's own statistics, 90% will do nothing, even if it means their death. They're going to sit there and say, well, it's God's will, or it's God's going to take care of me. I don't have to worry about that. But you know, in Acts, they had, I believe it was 14 years of prophetic words saying a famine was coming and to prepare and stock up and store. And in that course of 14 years, the believers did store up. And when the famine hit, the believers in Jerusalem had stores in order to supply food, not only for them, but for their neighbors. And that is one of the things that we have to consider, is that we have a number of different issues. If we simply look at the weather patterns this year, the elements of that perfect storm, all of the events coming together congruently, creating an aspect that there are food shortages on the way simply because of government statistics. And I don't believe that even what they're telling us now is even the full spectrum of how it's being affected. That I think they're even they may be even being a little too positive on the food production. Now, I'm not trying to say look at the glass half empty. I'm just saying let's be realistic and be prepared.
And what do people do when they're hungry? Let's forget the grand solar minimum. They get angry and they sometimes get mean. Well, with the grand solar minimum and things like this, expect people to go berserk. That KP index, you know, when it goes down to 0, you'll have more heart attacks, mental illness, everything comes up. And all this is happening at the same time.
Well, you know what? I have family in Spain. Y'all know that my mom's from there, and they've conversed with us, and things are really bad there. I mean, we've heard about Venezuela, but you're not hearing about the things that are going on in different countries. Spanish people are going and trying to leave their country looking for jobs and everything and looking for food because there's lack of food, lack of jobs, lack of everything over there, to where they are really suffering over there big time. And they are to the point where we've talked about it on the show about, they've talked about eating flesh. That has happened in Spain, where the history of Spain in the 1930s, I think it was. My mother had told me about the stories about how they ate the rat. First they ate the cats and the dogs. Then the rats started to come and they started to eat the rats because they were starving. The people were starving. Well, it has begun in Europe. It is spreading, people. It's not just going to be over there like we've seen in many years, where we're like, oh, it's just over there. It's not over there anymore. It's beginning to happen here. We're starting to see, like Mark doesn't see it in his area, but we're seeing it in Toledo, Ohio. They're seeing it in parts of California. They're seeing it in Texas. They're seeing it in, I believe she was from Minnesota, right? Or Montana. Montana. So they're seeing it in different places. They're strategically putting it in different places. And in this area, Lucas County is where I live. Lucas County and Wood County have farmers. The farmers do corn and soybeans. Their corn and soybean products were about not even 20% this year because of the rain and the snow, because of the area we're in is like considered swampland, and they had lost a lot of crop. In fact, even the farmer that used to be my landlord, his home garden he did a home garden that was like 20 feet by 30 feet for him and his family and his brother and their family. You know, they all get together and do it together. And he says we got 1/3 of anything from that garden this year because of this weather.
Yeah,
I think because of
the stuff.
Yeah, at Celeste Bishop Solom's website at theshepherdsheart.life, You can look that up. She's got a blog on there where she took pictures of her garden, comparison of last year and this year, and how and she has greenhouses. She has a greenhouse where she grows a lot of her stuff, and she showed the difference between last year and this year. And she's someone that has been doing this for decades, for 50 years. She knows how to grow plants, raise chickens, all that sort of stuff. And she showed the difference of how her own soil, which she mends, she puts not chemicals, but nutrients, all that sort of thing to grow organically productive plants, how it's been greatly affected.
Well, there's so much more to say on this subject, but we have reached the end of our broadcast. I know.
I'll make a segment out of this so that we can have it individually on the website. People can go watch this individually. So, and that will be available. I'll publish it to the social media and that type of thing too. So, but we do want everybody to understand that this is all top secret. So please don't tell anybody about it.
Oh, guys, there's so much more to talk about on this subject. We could, 2 hours would have been a start, but there are so many parts of this that we didn't even begin to cover. So do some research on your own and pray. And if the Ruach, if the Holy Spirit leads you, do some preparation. They always say you should have at least 3 days of food, even for natural disasters, food and water. So at least have that. And maybe if you figure out how to grow a garden in your tiny little house, which I've got to figure out in the midst of winter, let me know, because I'm going to be working on that myself. So,
and if there's two of you, you need to have two gardens.
Yeah, you got to have one that says John and one that says Sandy, and then one that says Amariah, et cetera, et cetera. So, but you know what? Let's pray and let's not fear, but let's be informed. All right. We do not fear. Look, Father did not give us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and of a sound mind. He gives us wisdom on how to work and how to act. And we remember one thing we've got to be ready for is our heart. And the safest place to be is the center of his will. So that's where to be. Anyway, I want to thank you guys for joining us. Thank you, John, for coming on the next chapter for the first time.
My pleasure.
And I know you wanted to talk more. So we may have to have a part 2 or something somewhere. Maybe it'll be on walking this next week. So maybe we'll put some time aside for some more of this to continue this conversation. Mark, thank you for joining us. Joe, always a pleasure for both of you. And I guess, what else do I need to say? Oh, next week we are going to have part 3 from Sherry on the seductive nature of the occult, part 3. She's going to bring some things forward. So you don't want to miss that. And I'm not looking at a script right now. I think that's it. So, hey, till next time, to everybody, thank you and shalom.
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 We'll be dancing in the streets, dancing at his feet, dancing in the streets of gold. We'll be dancing in the streets, dancing at his feet, dancing in the New Jerusalem. And we will sing Kadosh, Kadosh to the Lord of hosts, joining in the angels' choir, and forever we will be. Thank you for your generous donations to Messianic Lamb Radio. You will be blessed, as promised in Proverbs 22, verse 9. These donations enable listeners from around the world to hear words of hope in teachings and in songs. Toda Rabbah.
And then there's China. Few places in the world are seeing the explosion of God's power like the underground church in China is experiencing. And in the last 60 years, China's communist government has done its best to wipe Christianity off the map. What you are about to see is some of the rarest footage on the planet. In this church, the people wake up at 4:30 to come together for 2 hours to pray and worship. They do this every day. This church meets in the only place they're safe, a cave. This church meets on a farm, far away from prying eyes. Here's an example of an underground church outreach. The people sitting are Christians. The people who are standing are not. This particular preacher was once crippled, but was healed when someone prayed for her. She now preaches the good news of Jesus to anyone who will listen. In this particular meeting, over 1,000 people became Christians. Here, Christians cast out demons from an 18-year-old girl. She's now a preacher. In Shanghai alone, there are over 3,000 house churches, just like this one. One thing Dennis pointed out to me was that most of the underground churches in China are actually led by young people. These kids have all come out of the communist system, and they want nothing to do with it. They only want to spread the love of Jesus to everybody they meet. This is a music school. Well, that's the cover anyway. It's really a training school for students who want to be pastors. The government thinks they're simply learning to play instruments. One thing I quickly realized about the Chinese church is that it's a lot different from the American one. For one thing, they think a 4-hour sermon is short. In this church service, it's 120 degrees inside the building. The people meet for 12 hours straight. Dennis told me one story about a time he went to a very remote village in China to preach. He was led into a large room where the people were packed so closely together that he had his back to the wall and could reach out and touch the row in front of him. Everyone stood. There was no room to sit. He asked how long he should preach for, and they told him from 8:30 to 7 at night. Then they asked him if it wasn't too much trouble, could you come back tomorrow and preach from 8:30 to 7 again? And then, very sheepishly, they asked again, if you'd be so kind, could you come back the day after that and preach from 8:30 to 7? He asked how often he should take breaks, and they told him not to stop. The people will wait. Then he asked them what he should preach on. Everything, they replied, from Genesis to Revelation. And then it dawned on him, these people had no Bibles.
Don't go away, your show will start after a brief pause.